G'day Internet, Max right here, and today we have, which is one of my all-time favorite guests to have on this channel. This particular man was, I would say he was my first real mentor, and he didn't know that, but I was reading his books, consuming his DVDs and his audio tapes from basically as soon as, from when I had dial-up internet back in Australia. He was the very, very first person who opened my eyes to how the world really worked. And his blueprint that he gave me basically set me up for life. I didn't get blindsided, and I wasn't like confused by things that happened in the news. Everything made sense once I understood the blueprint, which Mr. G. Edward Griffin laid out for me all those many years ago. Ed, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, well, thank you, Max. I really appreciate that. And knowing that I had some impact on getting you wound up and out there and tackling all the problems of the world makes me feel really good.
Well, that's good. And thank you again for those of you at home. A couple of days ago, Ed was kind enough to share some of his time with my nephew. Now, I've been sharing some of the ideas that Ed was teaching me to my nephew since he was about 5, 6, 7 years old. And it was the thrill of my lifetime for my nephew, who's now in his 30s. So maybe the math doesn't quite work out. Maybe he was 10. But so my nephew got to interview Ed, and that was very generous of you. Thank you so much.
Well, that was a lot of fun. I didn't know he was your nephew, but he was a very bright guy, and I thought, here's another one. I'm glad we got one more in our team.
Yeah, it took me a while too. My goodness. Did he mention the fact he was a socialist in his 20s?
No,
I
he
had
didn't
to
mention that.
I
Well,
tried
aren't we
to
all?
I tried to beat that one out of him, but it didn't work. Eventually he came. It was actually his wife who turned him, so that was good.
Yeah. Well, my response is, aren't we all in our 20s socialists or
It is
idealists, unrealistic idealists of some kind?
some
Yeah.
kind, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so as I was saying to you just before we got on air, I think studied this and I got your blueprint, which is it's impacted me in so many positive ways, like, spiritually and emotionally and mentally and also financially. Like there's a huge part of my financial success is directly correlated to the blueprint of the world that you gave me. And but I realized I don't talk about it that much because I learned it 20 years ago and it's just it's there in the recesses of my mind. But I thought it would be unbelievable for our viewers to just go back to first principles and just talk at the really high level. What are the forces that are acting upon the world? Some people call it the matrix or the elite or the whatever, the Davos or all those kinds of things, all those organizations and the organizations within the organizations. But at a very high level, what is their goal and what are they trying to achieve and how is it affecting the world so far?
Well, that's really a good question, and it's probably at such a high level that I don't really know for sure. I have to start off by saying when you get way up there in the stratosphere and the oxygen starts getting pretty thin, you have to do a lot of guesswork. And the reason I'm saying that, I could start off on the level that everybody knows about, like there are good guys and there are bad guys out there, and this is a battle between good and bad. That's okay. That's not too high, but my mind really goes up into the higher elevations, and I wonder how did all this be? Why are there good guys and bad guys? And what is this thing about good and evil? What is that? And so, silly questions like that. I say they're silly. They're good questions, but they're silly to ask them because we can't answer them. We just ponder them. They're the imponderable questions. Why is there good and evil? If I don't care what your understanding is of creation, mine is that the evidence of design is so clear everywhere you look that to me, my logic and my experience tells me that creation is a product of some conscious design of some kind. And when you ponder what could be of such high intelligence to design the universe, not only design it, but to create it, it's mind-boggling. We can't even come close to appreciating it. And it's just supreme. But anyway, the reason I'm going to those levels is because that's where my mind always goes with a question like you just asked. What is really going on in the world? And so you get into these silly questions. We around our family dining table a lot, my sons and visitors that come by, we often are talking about, what is the essence of matter? Is matter really only energy? Which I think it is. But then the question is, okay, buddy, what is energy? Well, I don't know. Does anybody really know what energy is? We have a word for it. All these things that we don't understand, we put words on them, and we say, oh, now we understand it because we have a word for them, like energy or electron or electricity. What is that? We don't know. We just have a word for it. That's all. And we know how to manipulate it and move it. So those are the kinds of silly things that we get into, unanswerable, imponderable issues. So now your question, what's really going on in our world? And I think that the evidence strongly supports the idea that mankind is on this earth, whatever his origin is, that's another issue. You can't answer it. But whatever it is, I think there are different stocks. I think that we aren't all the same. I think maybe we have a multiple source. And the one source is not always the same as the other source. Now we come back to the question, are there good guys and bad guys? And there certainly are. The next question is, well, why are there good guys and bad guys? Is it because it's culture, what they've been trained to do, or because of the accidents of their experience? Or is it built into them in their genetic code and so forth? And now we come to my answer, which is certainly not an expert answer, but my answer is, it seems to me that I think we have more than one input to our human qualities. And there is what we would call a good and a bad, a strong and a weak. For everything, every quantitative issue that you can think of, there are two directions or two equal and opposing forces. For example, you cannot have up without down. You cannot have left without right. You cannot have good without evil. If you lived in a world where everything was good, we wouldn't know it was good because that's just the standard state. But in order to know good, you must say, oh my gosh, compared to this other thing, this is different. So what's going on now, we finally get away from all this highfalutin stuff, is that I think that there is a group of people on this planet who look just like us. This is weird, I know, but they look like us, and they are practically like us. But I do believe that somehow in their genetic code, somehow in their origins, they are substantially different. And I think there's a predator class, actually. I think it's about a hardcore predator class among a human population. I'm going to guess it's probably at about 1% of the population. But they're hardcore predators. I mean, they don't give a darn about you or anybody except how to utilize you, how to make you serve them. And they will do anything, repeat anything to bring that about. Those people are ruthless, they're very smart, and they know how to manipulate the rest of us. And we go along with do, we're having a good time. Let's all get together, and kumbaya ourselves through life. But these people are not like that. And so they attract this 1% or so, attract around them a lot of people who really don't know what they are, but they're having a rough time in life, and they've been pushed around, and they get angry, and they get envious that other people have more than they do. And they're easily recruited by this 1%. And they become the minions of these people. And they'll do what they're told, and they'll follow the orders of that 1% because it's profitable for them. And now they're living high on the hog. So I see it this way, Max, that there is a predator class out there, and they are the ones who generally, because of their nature, climb their way and claw their way to the tops of organizations and institutions because they want to mobilize other people to serve their purposes. And their lieutenants that they recruit in that next group, which is usually about 3 to 5% of their lieutenants who do their bidding, they're part of the predator class too, but they're not the ruthless ones. They're just participate in it if you give them a chance to, but it's not their idea probably. And those people always climb to the top in history to be the rulers and the elite, the oligarchs as we like to call them now. They become the wealthiest people because they're ruthless, that's all, and most of us are not that way. So what I'm saying now is that I see that we're in a battle between the great majority of people who are good-hearted, not pure. No, none of us are pure, but they want what is best for other people as well. They're not out just to inflict pain. They're not like that one little kid that you always run into in school out of hundreds that likes to pull wings off of butterflies and torture little creatures and birds and so forth. There are some that really do that, and those are the ones I'm talking about. Those are the ones that wind up being the commissars and being the presidents and the chancellors of the corporations and the countries. They're the ones that, have control over the armies and so forth and the police. So with that background, now that's just philosophical, my view. So I start with that, and that'll explain probably a lot of my view once you climb down out of that stratosphere and get down to the real world and see what's going on in Wall Street, for example. So I think that the predator class has, over many, many centuries, gradually consolidated its control over the rest of the people, without most people understanding it, realizing it at all. They just think that these people, because they're good actors, they're like, they're con artists, really, when they have to be. They can be tyrants, obviously tyrants. They can say, I am the emperor and you will follow my orders, and that's one extreme. Or they can talk like, well, let us work together and have peace, and let me help you with your goals and so forth. But what they have in mind is deception. So over the period of centuries and perhaps millennia, this predator class has risen to have an inheritance structure. They pass on their power and their heritage and their family connections, and they refer to it as their bloodline sometimes. And you're not qualified for anything unless you have that bloodline. And I know this is weird to most people because they've never thought about it or never come into contact with it. And I have, and it was shocking every time I get really close to something like that. But believe me, it is real. The bloodline is real. And these people are really evil people. And they're no one you can reason with. You have to cope with them. You have to defuse them, take away their power. And I'll come to that maybe in a minute, because eventually you come to the question, what are you going to do about these people? You have to stop them. And so that gets into a question of, well, how do you stop them? So maybe we'll come to that. But what I see now is that this predator class has taken control of, first of all, our monetary system over centuries and millennia. And they've passed it down. It's become pretty much a family affair. The bloodline, the family names, and so forth. And we all know who they are. The top ones they're all recognized in the newspapers once in a while, but they're not in the news every day. They go to great extent to stay out of the news. And we're talking about the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and people like that. And like the Rothschilds, I get a kick out of them. They're probably the most powerful family in the world. But if you go on the news and try and find any news about them, all you get is the social events. Well, they were at the racetrack the other day, and their horse didn't win, or they have a grape wine that they're introducing, and it seems all kind of frivolous. The super wealthy, what do? They have a new yacht. Well, not these people. They may do that, but they're busy at work and trying to gain further control over the monetary system and over the media and over the judicial system and so forth, because in the end, they want control over all the rest of us. So we come finally to the simple answer to your question. What's it all about is dominance. There's a small group of people that want to dominate and control the actions and the loyalties and the thoughts even of all the rest of humanity. They see it as somehow the fulfillment of their destiny. And if we don't understand that, we can't understand what's going on in the world today. And now I want to just emphasize one more time that the number of people in this group is extremely small. The real the movers and shakers is extremely small, but they've had a long time to consolidate their mechanisms of control and power, primarily through the monetary system. Because if you can control the money, who creates the money and under what conditions and who gets it, and what the interest rates are for the rest of us and so forth, you have an amazing amount of control over all the rest of the population, even though they may not want to cooperate with you, even if they don't like you. It doesn't make any difference. If you want to succeed in life, you need money. You need somehow to interact with others and use money as a means of gathering their labor, their performance, their service. The more money you have, the more people can serve you because you can pay them. And that's easy for these people because they have the money. In fact, they they make the bloody stuff. So it's real easy for them to buy politicians. And I think,
Let me just interrupt there for a second,
just let
Ed.
me just close this and
Oh,
then I'll come to
oh,
a full
okay.
stop. Because I
Yeah.
think a good place to stop is with the quotation attributed to Rothschild. I think it was Nathan Rothschild back in England, back in the days when all this was forming. He says, give me the power to issue the nation's money, and I care not who passes its laws.
Yeah.
And there you have the essence of this. If you can control the monetary system, you can buy politicians easily because most of those guys are up for sale anyway. That's the reason they went into politics, for the highest bidder. Well, the highest bidder is always those people that we're talking about. And that's why we got in the mess we're in today, because we have been bid into slavery.
Gotcha. Now, I wanted to, I guess I was so busy gushing during the introduction that I forgot to mention so for the listeners at home that you are the author of the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, which hopefully is certainly at least rings a bell for most people. Hopefully people have read it or listened to the audio, the abridged audio that you put out there. This is considered the Bible on how the monetary system in the world works. It's one of the most influential books out there. Because it's just reverberated and be redone, and people can speak about it. And I've witnessed the world because I was first exposed to your work, The Creature from Jekyll Island, early on. Let's call it 2005, something like this. And I remember I would start talking about, sound money and fractional reserve banking and all these things that you taught me, and no one had a clue what the hell I was talking about.
Right.
And then I remember in 2000, I think it was around 2008, 2009 with the global financial crisis. And I remember I was up in Montreal, Canada, and I was sitting in a cafe or something. I was with my wife, I think at the time, or girlfriend, whatever she was. And all of a sudden over here, I hear people talking about the Federal Reserve and money printing and stuff like that. I've never heard anybody talk about it. Never, ever. Even when I talked about it, I didn't know what I was talking about it. Here I overheard, and I kid you not, 10 minutes later, I heard somebody else on the other side of the room talking about the Federal Reserve, money printing. And it was after 2008, the big stimulus response. We're going to go and print what at the time was trillions of dollars and the biggest ever, and 25% of all the US dollars ever created since the founding or since the Federal Reserve have been created in the last, week. And it was this big, all of a sudden it was worth talking about. And then as time went on, we had things like Bitcoin come around. I think one of Bitcoin's greatest contributions to the world is it educates people on the monetary system and stands on the shoulders of your work, which is awesome. And now it just seems like so many people understand this. And your book is like the foundation of that for if you all the ripples outside of the pebble that went in the pond. Your book is in from my perspective the pebble, and the ripples that have gone on from that are just absolutely phenomenal. So I just wanted other people to understand exactly who they were listening to in case they had not joined the dots, that you are the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island. So you want to pick back up what you were saying, please?
No, no,
I'd love
I
you to
think
continue.
I think I probably ruined my reputation with going into that anyway, so we'll just leave that alone. Yeah, that's all. The stuff I was talking about is very esoteric, and it's fun to talk about. But you come down to, well, what are you going to do about this? How do we live our lives? How do we get out of this mess, if it's possible to do it at all? And you don't need to climb into those clouds to figure out how to, solve this problem. So yeah, I'm glad that I didn't write about what I was talking about a few minutes ago. I wrote about the real world of the Federal Reserve System and how the money control works. And it's as simple as I said a moment ago, is he who issues the money is the ruler of the system. And it's always been that way. And it
And I,
probably always will be. Now, the only question is who has the money? Will it be those who earn it through competition and providing goods and services that others have the freedom to accept or reject? Or is it somebody who passes the laws and says, you will do this, you will accept my money, or off with your head, And of course, it's always the latter part, but that's what the laws are all about. The legal tender laws is to force you to use the money of the tyrants.
that they can use. I'll add to that for people to understand the gravity of it, that money is one half of every transaction on the planet. You're buying goods, you're buying services, you're buying someone's labor, they're giving you something and you are giving them money. It is half of every transaction on the planet. There's nothing that comes close to something as important as money. And so if the money is corrupt, and if it's run by corrupt people, then the society is corrupt. For me, it's just
Absolutely, yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's it. Money is, I'm not against money, by the way. I think money is a very good thing. I mean, what's left, barter, and you can survive on barter, but civilization will not be a very interesting thing if you have to barter everything. No, money was a great invention, great discovery, probably is a better word. And I'm all for money. I'm all for banking. But to clarify that, I'm all for honest money and honest banking, not this deception. And the present system is built on deception.
Something else that's been very, eh, there's certainly plenty to get sad about over the last decade, I would say, if you're watching things, but there's also plenty to be happy about. I see like the trust in media. So with this, you kind of touched on these concepts before. You talked about this predator class has consolidated their power in various different ways by taking over control centers in society. And those are like political parties, media, all these kinds of organizations. You talk about in your book at great length, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, the whole deal. So, you know, where was I going with this? So with this money, they can take up these things. But what I do notice is that it's been very nice to see that the media class has just got chopped. No, only fools believe the media at this point. It's like there's no one who's taking any notice of the mainstream media, and I think that's a really cool, powerful. That's one of the legs of the chair that they're sitting on. I think we've knocked that one out. Now then they've rolled over and they've moved into the world of social media. Because we abandoned media, so that's corrupt. Let's go over to social media. That worked for a little while. Then they took over that. Luckily, Elon Musk has jumped in there and helped us a little bit with Twitter to various degrees, which is kind of fun and cool. But the battle is kind of on. There's a lot more to be happy about now than there was 15 years ago when no one understood what the hell I was talking about when I talked about any of this. That's on the good side. Now, on the bad side, they've strengthened their controls, taken over new methods of control, brainwashed a whole bunch of people. I think society's kind of split. I see to the people who have woken up, and there's so many more of them than there used to be. But there's also so many people who double down on the insanity on the other side of the equation, and they'll do some truly evil, horrific things now to defend this predator class. And that's an interesting dichotomy. Is that something that you anticipated, or did you think that's how it was going to be, or is that new for you? How have you been thinking about that?
Well, yes, it's something I thought about a great deal and over quite a while, a period of time. And it's not a pleasant thought because I come out the other side of that process with a slightly different view of what's happening today. And let me explain that. I mentioned before that the predator class that's running the show today are not stupid. They're very smart people. And very much like the military, I'm sure, they have strategists. And maybe the key people themselves are the strategists, but they certainly have access to as many very smart people as they can hire or need to hire to build strategies for what's going to happen in the future, to anticipate it. The military does this all the time. They have a strategy book. So if this happens, then what do we do? They want to know in advance what could happen and what the proper response is so that they don't have to waste time when it happens figuring out what to do. They already know what to do before it happens, and they think of all the possibilities and all the inevitabilities. So surely they did that because they've always been able to ride every crisis that comes along. It's because they know it. They either know it's coming because of the impossibility of the present situation, like the devaluation of the dollar. It can't just go on forever. And they know for another reason it's because they're planned it themselves. So that leads to the conclusion that what's happening today, including the awakening of the people and the arrival of leaders to lead the opposition against them, was anticipated. So if that's true, and it is in my view, then we have to ask ourselves, well, supposing we were sitting around that board of directors table of the opponents that we have, and we knew that this was going to happen sometime in the future, there'd be a great awakening on the part of the people of the world. They're going to be aroused. They're going to discover what we're up to and so forth. And there's nothing we can stop, nothing we can do to stop that awakening. So what do we do about it? Do we just wait around and see how it all turns out? And if I were sitting around that board table, and if I were of the mindset that they are, I would say, are you kidding? Wait to see who's going to rise up as a genuine leader and lead the opposition? Heck no. We will provide the leader against us. We will train, we will pick the men or the women, the group, not just one or two people, but hundreds of people scattered all throughout society. We will build a mass movement of opposition against us led by our people, because the average person is not a leader. They're looking for leaders. And so all we have to do is just put one in front of them, train him to say the right things and to do some good things, actually, against us to improve his credibility, because otherwise the public won't not follow him. He's got to actually strike a blow against us. And then we control both sides of the conflict. We cannot lose, even though we know there's an opposition movement, but we are leading it now. All we have to do is just provide a controlled opposition leadership class. That's what I would come up with. And if you look in history, you see that this sort of thing happens, actually happens. Sometimes there are traitors, and sometimes there are double agents that are, and in the modern age of security agencies, CIA, KGB, and so forth, this sort of thing is not so much a question of treachery or being a traitor. These people are trained by the other side to go and cross over and become false leaders. So the reason I mention that is because we mustn't get carried away by thinking that because the public is waking up and we've got some people showing up who are looking pretty good and doing good things, we can't necessarily assume that that means we are going to win. It could mean, and that's all I'm saying, it could mean we have to look very carefully at these leaders and make sure they're the real thing and not controlled opposition leaders. And that's a hard thing to sell. The average person does not want to hear this, because that means they have to look at some of the people they have instinctively, had knee-jerkly said, this is a good man. Look, he said, look, we got to get rid of these people. It might even be somebody that said in an election once, vote for me and I'll put Hillary Clinton in jail. Well, people voted for him, but Hillary Clinton never went into jail. The same person was once asked on the campaign trail, what about Mr. Soros? What are we going to do about Mr. Soros? And this same person said, I have it on video, oh, poor Mr. Soros, leave him alone. He's got enough troubles as it is, and so forth. You don't see those things. And then the opposition comes out, the crazy lefties, the violent people, the ones that burn and destroy, and they're hideous people. And the public was be inclined to say, well, I don't like this other guy, but I hate these people, so I guess I have to be for this other guy. And you run into the strategies that are obviously would be thought up if we were leading the opposition. We would come up with things like that. So I'm just throwing out a word of caution before we get too enthusiastic. I believe that our opposition anticipated this a long time ago, and I'm certain that they're active in trying to take over the opposition. I've seen it in my own work. I've seen people come into my organization who at first I thought, wow, they're really great. They're even offering to donate their time and substantial amounts of money. These are the real deal. And I find out later, no, they're not. They're there to confuse, to divide, to make sure that we don't do anything really constructive. So with that caveat, I will now go back and pick up where we're in arm lock. Yes, I'm grateful to see that the public is awakening and they want to do something. But now our next mission is to show them, be careful who they choose as leaders, because we know that the false leaders are out there waiting to lead us into defeat in the way of fighting for the right.
I had a couple different ways I want to go in this conversation. In terms of choosing those leaders and understanding some ideals and principles that you might want them to have, we'll go into what those ideals and principles are in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But like newsflash, I think they're along the lines of libertarian thoughts. I had something that was interesting for me to try and understand that. And throughout my years meeting ANCAPs, anarcho-capitalists, and understanding their perspective and their arguments for no government whatsoever, to, more the Ron Paul kind, so it was like almost NCAP, almost not, right there, and just very limited government, small government, all these kinds of thoughts. And then I thought about what happened in El Salvador recently. And I'm sure you're aware of it, but for the viewers at home, basically a strong man came in. El Salvador was just completely overrun by gangsters, thugs, and all the rest. And it was terrorizing society, and the society couldn't step ahead as a result. A strong man came in and basically just started throwing people in jail left and right, anyone who had a gang tattoo. And it just, there was no, what would be the call? There was no due process. It was almost like things had gotten too bad for due process, and he had to come in very heavy-handed and just throw a whole bunch of people in jail. And as we look back with the benefit of hindsight, it's turned out unbelievably good for El Salvador, I would say, over the last handful of years, at least anyway, in terms of massively reducing their crime, the country getting ahead in a few ways and whatever else. And I thought about that, and so it raised the question for me, I'll throw in another example. Even like apartheid in South Africa, like there was some, very good and sensible libertarian arguments as for why that should not happen, and it's almost like celebrating the end of apartheid. But the results haven't been great either. It hasn't been good at all, and so it's starting to throw around with me, and I'm like, does a society need to be a certain level of good in order to live the libertarian philosophies like well, or is there a space, like to go back to the El Salvador example, is there a space for heavy-handedness and eradication of due process and all that, because the society is too far gone and you have to become more extreme or something like this? When I was younger, I think I viewed like the libertarian principles and arguments as absolutes and always worked and whatever else. But as I got older, I started to see some things, and so I started to question, but I'm not sure of the answer. About, are things as black as white as I always thought? And so, yeah, that's the question as well as I can put it. Do you have any thoughts to that?
Well, yes, I do, actually. Yeah, the same thing happens all the time around the world. The strong man comes in and has no consideration for the personal rights of anybody in the name of putting an end to the crime that's so rampant. I think the Philippines went through the same thing too. And everybody, they're torn, as you and I are. Well, that's the only way you can get rid of these criminals and these thugs, is to meet force with force. And that may be true. And there could be an argument, there seems to be an argument that people endorse, that there comes a time when everything crumbles and you can't worry about a constitution. Constitutions don't help because the system has been taken over by a tyrant of some kind, or other gangs, or whatever it is, somebody you don't like. And I wouldn't argue against that. I mean, if there are 5 or 6 people coming at me, and most of them have daggers and they're out to kill me, and one of them doesn't, I don't know which one. Maybe he has a dagger too. I don't know. I might have to defend myself against all of them and not have time to figure out which one is not going to kill me, and so forth. You can always argue these things, and but the principle still, I think, should rise to the top. The beginning of the decline of all republics, as far as I can tell, and I don't know about all of that history, but the beginning of the decline of a republic, meaning a system of government that has restrictions on its laws. It can do whatever the majority wants, except, and then they have exceptions. This is one thing, or 2 things, or 20 things, or 100 things that even the majority cannot do, regardless if it's everybody against one person. One person has a right to stand against all the rest in the nation, and that's a republic. And because they recognize in that concept that there are certain inalienable rights, as they did say in our own Declaration of Independence, inalienable rights that even the majority is not able to take away from an individual. And that's a republic. So the beginning of the decline of a republic is when they always throw in a clause that says, except under dire circumstances, like war or something like. We don't have time for these niceties anymore. If we're at war, or if we have a crisis, or if we've been, if there's a food shortage, or if there's rioting, or, once you throw in that exception, that's the beginning of the end every time, because these smart people, these demagogues that we're talking about, know how to create a crisis if they have to, and create a condition that justifies their taking away those rights of a republic. And now they are the dictators. And they usually are greatly applauded when they do that, because things are so bad. Generally, they create the bad situation. So people will be so sick and tired of it, they're looking for a strong man, and they create the situation, and they come in and solve the situation by being a strong man, and everybody loves them. Now, the trouble is that all those criminals and those gang members are gone, and that's good, but now the government remains, and they're doing exactly the same things that the criminals and the gang members did, except we voted for them. So now what do? We're stuck. That's the thing. That's the hinge right there. And the question that you asked is a tough one. Is there ever an excuse to suspend human rights? My answer is no. Never a logical reason. Now, there might be an emotional reason or a desperation or something where you have to, simply because you don't have an option. I guess you could do that, but you don't want to write that into your Constitution and say, here's how you do it, guys. If you want to destroy this beautiful system, here's the clause you're going to use. Create a crisis, and then you have justification to do what you want to do. So that's my comment on it. And I keep thinking on this next book that I'm writing. I've been writing for way too long. But in the very end, I want the chapter to be a constitution for the world. And that is one of the really tough issues that I want to deal with. How do you create a system whereby you don't allow this concept to creep into it and destroy it? Because it always will destroy it if you don't do that. I have some ideas. I don't want to bore you with them right now, because first of all, they're not finalized. I have some finishing to do on it, but I think it can be done. I think it can be done, but it's not going to be, it's never been done before.
Yeah. As you were talking about that transition there, I was like reminded of a George Washington situation whereby he was the strong man. He came in, fought the war, and at the end of that war, I mean, if he wanted to become king of America, he could have.
The people wanted him to be. They thought he would be.
Yes. And he abdicated that and said, no, let's do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out to be an incredible gift to the world. I feel the same way about Satoshi Nakamoto and Bitcoin. I feel like here's this amazing thing, and if he stuck around, he could have been the person who dictated where Bitcoin ended up 10, 15, 20 years later. But he didn't. He said, this is a gift to the world, I'm out, and disappeared. Where time will tell how that experiment works out. I'm pretty hopeful, as you might know. But yeah, so that seemed to be a common thread. It's like, in your story, it was like, yeah, okay, so you've suspended human rights, and this government stepped in to get rid of the bad guys, but now the government's doing what the bad guys did.
Exactly.
In some exceptions, General Washington.
Yeah, very rare.
Nakamoto.
Very rare. But even in George Washington's case, the Constitution allowed for this same thing to happen after he's gone. And once you allow it, it's going to happen in time. It might not happen this year or this generation, but sooner or later, the good guys that are in office will die or retire. They'll be replaced by new people. And sooner or later, the predator class will seek out that position, because that's what they do. A system, a state, let's call it. I hate to call it government, because I'm not an advocate of government, mainly because government's purpose is to govern, and I do not want to be governed. I want to call this state that we want, I want to call it a protectorate, because that's what we want the state to do, is to protect our lives and our liberty, and that's it. So call it a protectorate, and so I want to see that. I want to see that nailed down, so that people can't distort it. And they will. The predator class will figure out a way to distort the best system you can think of, and it's not dependent on just good people. If you say, well, we just want good people in office, I think of that letter that some doctor wrote to Thomas Jefferson after the Constitution was finally ratified, and the doctor said, well, Mr. Jefferson, now that we have this new republic, I think he used the word republic, in place, how can we be sure that only good men are elected into office? And Jefferson's reply was the answer I'm talking about. He said, don't talk to me about good men in office. I mean, he said, rather let us bind men down with the chains of the Constitution. And in modern terminology, he would have said, good men in government, are you kidding me? You got to be joking. And he understood that when you have an institution like the state that has great power of influence and money, it's a magnet to the predator class. They love that, and they'll swarm into it, and they pretend to be good people, and they want to protect your rights and all that. But what they really want is to get hold of the money and the power. And that will always happen because of human nature. So if you want to prevent it from happening, you've got to write a constitution, as Jefferson said, the chains of the Constitution to prevent that from happening. I think it can be done. But so I'm very glad that you brought that up, because that is really the hinge of our failure in America. We didn't, well, I shouldn't say we, the founding fathers probably thought about it. I'm sure Washington thought about it. I'm sure Jefferson did, maybe Madison and all the boys, Hamilton. But they didn't come up with a solution in the Constitution itself, probably because they were desperately trying to get unity from all of the 13 colonies to agree on it. And if you got too specific, maybe we wouldn't have had a United States of America. So it was an instrument of compromise too. That it turned out to be so darn good and still be an instrument of compromise is amazing. So my thought is that now we're seeing how this all unfolded. The next time around, which is our turn to write a new constitution, it's our turn now. We can improve on it by sewing up the holes, patching up the holes of the old one, and putting the missing pieces in, because we now have the experience to draw on.
I've heard, I'm not particularly knowledgeable on the subject, but at the time of the Civil War, the South seceded. They needed their own constitution. And I've heard from a Southern scholar that he believed that the South's constitution was even better than America's constitution. They had seen some of the flaws, seen some of the failures, and improved upon them. I'm not sure where that constitution stood on the issue of slavery, but in some of the other holes, I'm going to guess that you're somewhat familiar with that. And if you had any thoughts on that?
Well, actually, I've heard that, but I have not studied the Articles of Confederation at great length. I really wasn't looking for that. I read it and I said, oh, they picked this out of that, and they picked that, and they put that in our Constitution. I was looking for the continuity of ideas, but I wasn't looking for things that had been omitted. But it's quite possible. But it makes no difference. It didn't get into ours, and so it's the task now befalls on us. It's our turn to go from the beta model to the next model, and through trial and error, mankind will find the answer sooner or later.
Agreed. Perhaps this is a good time to talk about and for people at home, I want you to understand, Ed has been a prolific writer, documentary maker, interviewer, and just another one you're probably familiar with that became really famous in the last kind of 5-10 years was Yuri Bezmenov, the KGB defector, who kind of laid out the plan of how, I think it was something like 85% of the Soviets' budget went into subverting the United States. It wasn't nothing to do with the war. It was about getting into our colleges, getting into our society, and demoralizing the United States from within. It's an amazing interview. I'm sure many of you have seen it, but most people don't know that Ed's the one interviewing Yuri Bezmenov in that video. So anyway, there's a plethora of work that you should 100% consume of Ed's. One of them I want to talk about now, Ed, is The Chasm. And this is something that I read a long time ago, but it's a short read. It's a short essay that you produced. And it really helped for me solidify and categorize the different types of governments around the world, how they work, what their principles are. Why don't you pick it up and take it away? And what were your thoughts of The Chasm? What are the key principles, and how can people get their hands on it?
Great, thank you for that. It's, to me, understanding what's in the chasm is critical to solving all the problems that we want to solve, including the ones we've been talking about, because it takes the level of discussion above the level where people are saying, well, those are the bad guys and we're the good guys, and what we want to do is replace the bad guys with good guys. that never works because you don't know who the good guys are. And some of the worst con artists in the world are not what they seem to be. In fact, I've often said I've never met a good con artist that I didn't trust. Of course.
Good the
So
definition.
yeah. So the idea that we're going to solve these problems by getting rid of the bad guys, whether it's a political party or something like that, some group, we're going to vote in the Democrats or we're going to vote in the Republicans or vote in the Independents or the Libertarians or whatever it is, the good guys. We don't know whether they're good guys. And the only way we can tell is to ask them what they believe and then to see if they have lived their lives accordingly. That's the second part, by the way, because it's easy to say, yeah, I believe in the Constitution. But if you look at their track record, they've violated the Constitution with every vote they've ever taken. And but they know that if they say they believe in the Constitution and they want to get rid of all those rascals in the streets that are burning our buildings, the average public will say, oh, that's a good man, we'll vote for him. And of course, it's a lie. So I sort of wandered off my track here. The chasm, where I was going with that is, of course, we have to get above the level of good guys versus bad guys. And the only way we can tell in terms of what we are entitled to tell, it's not my business to tell you what to believe in terms of your religion or in some of your ethics, unless it affects me. And I mean, I might have different views on, maybe you come from a country where multiple wives is perfectly acceptable. I was shocked to find out, for example, when I was over in the Middle East and I was invited to several different places where they had beautiful families with more than one wife, two families actually living side by side with the same man as the father of all these kids. And they lived very well and they got along fine. They were very moral people. I was surprised. I wasn't prepared for that. And I realized that, well, those ethics in that country and that culture are different than ours, our Christian ethics. But does that make them bad people? Well, no, these were good people. And as far as I could see, in terms of their lives and their treatment of other human beings, and their families got along fine. And the only competition I could detect in that family relationship is that the children of the first wife were very proud that their mother was the first wife and not the second wife. That was the extent of it.
Interesting.
Wow, this is really interesting. So the point, okay, it's what you believe in is the most important thing. And if we want to get rid of the bad guys, we have to see why they're bad guys. What do they think that make them the bad guys? And then we have to examine ourselves and say, well, what do we think that we think makes us the good guys? That means we have to start dealing with ideas, with ideology. What is the proper role of the state, for example, is the question. When we have the state formed, and if we want it to be in our interest, what should we tell it to do? And more importantly, what should we tell it not to do? Because the general impression of the average person is that, well, if you win an election, you get 51% of the vote, you win. Winner takes all. There's nothing you can't do because you won the election. And if you happen to be in that 49% or smaller group, sorry, Charlie, they can plunder you, they can imprison you, they can tell you what to think, they can kill you because they won the election. Well, of course, that's a democracy, pure democracy. And a republic is a democracy with limits on what the majority can do. Even the majority of 1,000,000 to 1 or 10,000,000 to 1, the numbers don't count. One person has a right to stand against all of the rest on the basis of an idea. And those are the ideas, the things that the state shall not do, the things that the majority shall not do against the minority. That's the definition of a republic. It's a very important thing. So, but Americans and most people around the world still now are enamored with the word democracy. They think, oh, democracy is what we're fighting for. Democracy must be preserved. Democracy, in the sense I've just described, is the worst possible form of government. And our founding fathers knew it, and they said so in their debates when they were writing our Constitution. So what are these ideas then? What are these ideas that certain things that even the majority cannot do against the minority? And when you look at that issue, it divides the people in the world into two camps. And that's why I call it the chasm, the deep and impenetrable, incrossable divide, a canyon. As we have, I have a picture here of it on this little book I'll be talking about in a second. You can see this canyon, this is really, that is the chasm. Now, that is nothing compared to the ideological chasm that exists between these two groups of people. So what are they? They're called collectivists and individualists. Those are strange words to many people today, but they once were very common words. And when I was researching this for the first time some years ago, I came across those words individualism and collectivism often in the old books. Anything over 80 or 100 years ago, you were apt to find those words used extensively, and everybody knew what they meant. But along with World War I and World War II especially, it was decided by this predator class that we've been talking about, that the people of the world shouldn't understand this idea. And they started subverting it. And they started using the word democracy as though that was the ideal. When up until that time, everybody knew that democracy was a very dangerous and a very bad system of government, because the mob always wound up ruling. Once they discovered that by their vote, they could steal anything they want from the minority, then that's when the taxes started going up, and there were welfare programs and special grant programs for certain classes of people that had political pull and so forth. And the system always destroyed itself. And that was well understood 200 years ago. But since World War II, all of that was stricken from the current history books, and students going to school today don't know anything about that. Well, I decided to pick up on it when I discovered it, because I found the essence of our whole dilemma today. Everything is wrapped up in our understanding of these two ideological views. So what are they? Well, I hate to take so long on this, Max, and I apologize. I realize I am rambling, and it probably sounds very much like it. But what I'm rambling over are sort of the steps that I had to take in my own thinking to be able to understand what I'm about to say now. And one of those steps was when I was still in the corporate world, and I became concerned over the rise of communism around the world. They'd taken over Russia, they'd taken over China, they were even in Cuba, at our doorstep. And Americans were concerned about the threat of communism, and so was I. So I decided I wanted to find out what communism is all about. What is it that attracts these people? Because as far as I could see, it was not a very good deal. Every country that fell to communism wound up massacring millions and millions of its people. And people then, had they been living in a lifestyle of abundance, were now living in poverty and despair, starving to death. And how could people go for this? And how could there be revolutions in favor of communism? So I wanted to find out. So I went down to the communist bookstore in Los Angeles, down on Larchmont Street. It was called the People's Bookshop, of course. And I hung out with the comrades there for a little while, and I bought most of their important books, and I read them. And I read them diligently, taking notes on them, because I really wanted to know what it was that they believed. I discovered, incidentally, that most of the people I talked to down there, the volunteers in their bookstore, had not read most of those books. They had no idea what was in them at all. And they were going to teach me about Leninism and Marxism, and they didn't even know the difference between Leninism and Marxism. They thought it was all the same. But I read Lenin, and they hadn't. They'd read Marx, that's all they'd read. So anyway, all that aside, I got to be a little bit of a scholar on it. And then I decided to take a look at what Adolf Hitler believed. I don't know what motivated me to do that, but I bought Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, and I read that, and it hit me like a freight train. Everything Hitler and Marx were saying was identical. Their ideology was based on the identical principles, and I was able to classify them, and there were about 9 or 10 of them, but I found 7 of them, as I recall. That was my original number that I settled on as being the key ones, the commonality between communism and fascism or Nazism. And I've also found the commonality with, I read the little red book by Chairman Mao, and I read some stuff that Mussolini had written. And I read some stuff that had been written by American collectivists too. And they called themselves Americanists, but they were preaching the same thing. And that's when I realized that these words mean nothing. Communism, fascism, Nazism, Americanism doesn't mean anything unless you understand what these principles are underneath those words. So I made a list of these principles, and the shocking thing is that all of these isms that we were fighting against and so worried about were the same thing, and it's called collectivism. And I discovered that the opposite of all of those things is called individualism. And our American Republic, although it never used the word individualism or collectivism in it at all, was all about, our Constitution was all about establishing a republic based on the principles of individualism. And so all of a sudden the lights are going off. I think, well, my gosh, somebody better tell the world about this. I'm not the only one that's read Marx and Mein Kampf, am I? And why aren't people talking about this? So I decided that I was going to talk about it. And I've been talking about it ever since. And when I started to write my, quote, next book, which I'm embarrassed to say, started on the day after 9/11. That's how long ago. That's how long I've been working on it. I decided that I would frame an understanding of individualism versus collectivism. I would frame it in the context of historical events that were just horrible events that were justified under the principles of collectivism, and that would be forbidden under the principles of individualism. So I started with 9/11. What was the motivation behind whoever? I personally think that it was an inside job, okay? People may want to debate me on that. That would be fine. But to me, the evidence is that the official narrative is not true, and that it was done and it was motivated as a means of convincing the American people to support collectivism in America, to create a crisis, a danger, a fear object so great that the Americans would be willing to abandon their constitutional rights in favor of protection against something horrible like terrorism, and later like a virus, and whatever horror thing comes along. The solution by these people is always to surrender your personal liberty in order for the government to be able to protect you against these things. And once that picture was clearly in my mind, I said, oh my gosh, that's used everywhere. It's the rubber stamp. They use the same strategy for everything. Create a crisis, create fear, offer a solution. That the solution is always the same: the expansion of government, the increase of taxes, and the loss of personal liberty. Keep moving closer and closer and closer to tyranny, which is in modern times always collectivist tyranny. In the ancient times, it was tyranny by the sword, but in modern times, it's tyranny by the mind. They control you by your mind and your capacity for fear and your desire for comfort and all those things. It's a psychological war. So all of that is the background for this thing called the chasm. So I decided just a few months ago that rather than wait for me to laboriously finish this book, and I'm still working on it, I ought to take the information about collectivism versus individualism and just extract it from this manuscript, put it all together and put some stuff in there that wasn't in the manuscript yet, and make it available to the world if anybody's interested in reading it. So that's what I've done. It's a 50-page thing, and it's all part of my next book. And if anybody wants to read it, it's free. I would encourage people to just, if you want to see this booklet and read it and analyze what I think about it and what history has shown, just go to, here's the key, it's chasm.realityzone.com. So it's chasm.realityzone.com. And you go there and you just tell us you want a copy of this and we'll send it to you. So that's it. I mean, I took too long to say it. I'll just wrap it up. I can say it in a very few words. This issue of collectivism versus individualism is the issue behind all issues of importance in our world today. And if you're interested in knowing what the issue is, this is where you'll find a place to begin.
Yeah, so I will add to that. I first read The Chasm many years ago, and I've read it dozens and dozens and dozens of times since. Whenever anybody is on this intellectual journey, it's very often the very first thing I get them to read, and it's brilliant. It makes very, very difficult things very, very easy to understand, which is one of Ed's fortes. Over the years, he's tackled some very, very difficult topics, and he's written some great works on it. Very, very difficult topics, very, very easy to understand. And it's a fantastic read. It's really, really interesting. And you mentioned the number 7 of the 7 pillars of collectivism. When I read The Chasm, I believe there were 5 pillars. Did you add some?
Well,
Did
yes,
you?
I did. I thought I had put everything in there, and then later on, I discovered that there were a couple of things which I probably missed. And one, I'm looking it up here. I'll count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay.
Okay, well, I am going to, as soon as this interview is over, I'm going to go ahead and download the new version of The Chasm and find out what the 2 pillars are that I've been missing.
Well, here are the headings: the intrinsic nature of rights,
Mhm.
the intrinsic nature of rights, supremacy of the individual, freedom of choice, property rights are human rights, money without coercion. There's one I didn't put in.
That's a
You'd
new
think
one.
that would be the first one I would put in, but I was so imbued with that, I thought everybody knows about that. No, they don't know about that. Money without coercion, equality under law, and the proper role of the state. So that's it. You could put more in there, but you cover that. And I was able to condense those 7 even into 3. If you really want to get streamlined on this and you're interested in becoming active in restructuring the Constitution or anything like that, if you boil it down to 3, you'll cover it. And that is individual rights, equality under law, and freedom of choice. And that'll do it. You don't have to be a scholar, actually. There's some very scholarly stuff in here, but and we had to make analogies. What would you do what is your right to kill somebody? Do you have a right to kill somebody? Of course you do. Your individual right. If they're trying to kill you, nobody or very few people would object to your defending yourself. And if they have to take their life to do it, too bad. You have a right to. If somebody was trying to enslave you, put chains on you, make you serve them for the rest of your life, would you have a right to fight for your life with taking their life to escape? I think most people would say, yeah, protecting your liberty is on the same ground. But beyond that, I would challenge anybody's right to kill another human being if it weren't for the defense of their own life and liberty, or the defense of somebody else's, which that gets a little tricky because there's some weasel words that's possible, but it can be covered, and that's what we have courts for. So, yeah, if you want to write a law on the books and keep it consistent with these principles, all you need to do is just worry about those 3 things, and it'll come to pass. So let me just summarize. I think the most revealing issue in all of this is the question of where does government get its, or I use the word government, I'm sorry, where does the state get its authority to use lethal force, even against you? It's like you're hired a guard to guard your house. Here's a gun. Now, you can use that gun for anything, including to shoot me. Would you do that? I would under one circumstance only. When I say shoot me, I say, that is, shoot anybody. That's usually how the contract is written. Only if I was able to put in the exceptions. Accept this and accept that and accept that. Or better yet, to put in the 1 or 2 areas in which it's acceptable. And for everything else is an exception. That's the better way to approach it. In other words, instead of writing a Bill of Rights that you have a right to this, 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 and this, I think the better way to write it is you have a right to do anything you want, anything, of a million different things, except these 7 things, or 2 things. That's the better way to approach it. But that's not usually how they do it. They focus on the things that they want to give you a right to, as though they're giving you a right. They don't have the power to give you a right to life. That's not their authority. So anyway, if you assume that the state derives its just powers from the citizens, then you have to say, well, what do the citizens have the power to use What is it that gives them the power to kill or coerce somebody else? And you always come back to those two things, the right to defend your life and your liberty. Okay, if that's all that we have, the authority, only reasons we have the authority for using coercion, that means we can delegate that, only those two things, to the state when we vote a candidate. We can't give him a right to do something which we don't have. It's as simple as that. So if we can't force our neighbor to close his shop on Sunday, or to hire somebody at a certain salary, or to not be critical of his neighbor, or not to use a bad word, if we can't use coercion against our neighbor for that, we cannot delegate any bureaucrat or any politician to do it either. And once you get that concept clearly in mind and think about it, all of a sudden all of this clears up and you realize that probably about 95% of the laws that are now in the books violate that principle. And that is the real reason we're in the trouble we are today. We've asked the state to become our masters, and we don't have the authority to do that. And therefore, they don't have the authority to do that. So we have to stop asking them to take care of us. We create the problem because we don't realize the consequences of this decision to ask them to take care of us, except for the defense of life and liberty, because we need that. That's where we need men with arms, with guns and bombs and all kinds of things.
To sum this up, I learned this from the Chasm listeners, so this is the kind of thing you're going to get in there, is that so the origin of rights is, in the way the founders thought about it, and the way individualists think about it, is that rights are intrinsic to your humanity. You just being a human being, you have the rights, and then you can delegate the rights that you have to government to serve you and humanity and whoever else. And if you think of the words, the famous words that you're familiar with in the founding documents for America, it is the rights are inalienable, and then to protect those rights, we have created government.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Versus the alternative is the words written in, say, the United Nations Charter. And in there, they say you have this right, and this right, and anything else as prescribed by law. Meaning, when we vote on it and we write down the law, that's the rights you have. And if we take them away, that's the rights you don't have.
Precisely.
The rights are not intrinsic to you. The rights are either a gift of the government, or they might choose not to give you that gift, but they're not intrinsic to you. And that's the polar opposite between individualism and collectivism. Yeah. One of those pillars.
Yep, each pillar has that kind of a dichotomy on it. It's either this or that. It can't be any middle ground. And once you think it through, there's only one logical choice if you want to live in freedom.
Yeah. Excellent.
That's all there is to it.
A couple more things I want to touch base on. You've got an exciting thing coming up called the Red Pill Expo. Let's make sure we touch on that. Do you want to? I'm going to pull it up on the screen so people can have a look. While I'm doing that, do you mind sharing a little bit about what that is?
Well, Red Pill Expo is one of my favorite projects. We created it I guess our first Red Pill Expo was 2017, and we held it in Bozeman, Montana, of all places. We didn't think many people would come, but lo and behold, they came from all around the world, and we packed the place. The idea, as you probably know, is that we wanted to reach out to a level of understanding on these issues that maybe is not so highfalutin or so academic, so scholarly as the things we've been talking about. So we could reach to the common man that doesn't have time or interest in discussing these things. We need those people, and they're good people. If they understood them as we think we do, why, they'd be totally on our side. But they're not allowed to think about these things because the media and the school system and other channels of information that they depend upon are closed to this kind of information. So we knew that we had to reach out to the broader base of the community, and we wanted some kind of a slogan or some kind of an appearance for doing that, other than the heavy stuff, Freedom Force, International, and so forth. So we dreamed up the idea of Red Pill based on the meme, the 2000, I guess it was 2020? No, I guess it was the year 2000. Anyway, it's about 20 years ago, 24 years ago, called the Matrix. And of course, most people are familiar that in that story, humanity, all humans, are living in an illusion. They're actually wired up to some machine, and they're just fuel for the matrix, and their brains are being used as chips for the master machine. But they think they're living their normal life. It's all in their minds. They think they get up in the morning and go to work and eat breakfast, and they go on vacations, and they get married, and they have children, and they pay their taxes, and all they have their problems. And but none of that is true. They're just wired up, and they're living totally in their minds. And in the story, of course, the few humans that were able to escape the matrix are out desperately trying to rescue the rest of humanity, to rescue them, and they're trying to get them to wake up and break free. And to do that, the first step is to take a pill. They're given a choice of two pills. The blue pill puts them back to sleep into illusion, or the red pill brings them all the way out, and they can see the world the way it really is. And so that's the beginning and the basis of the story. So we thought, everything we're talking about, everything, can be framed in that kind of an analogy. See the world the way it really is, not these illusions that we've been fed. So we thought we'd give it a try and see if the public responded to it. And sure enough, they did. And I'm very happy because it's a popular meme, to be sure, but it's totally valid for everything we want to say. It could be framed in terms of breaking out of the illusion and seeing reality. So that's what we're doing in order to reach out to the larger group of people that are totally ready for understanding of the real world in those terms, but may not be ready to sit down and read the works of Karl Marx or Adolf Hitler and discuss the finer points of collectivism versus individualism and so forth. They understand this business of wake up, buddy, and see life the way it really is. And so that's what we're doing. And we have expos. And we had, usually in the beginning, we had one every year. Then we had two of them per year. Then last year we had one. And I think this year we're going to have two again. So anyway, that's what the expos are. We bring speakers together who will tell about their personal experience, where they have discovered the difference between reality and illusion in their personal lives or their professional lives. And once they found out the truth, they're just as anxious as can be to tell what they learned to everybody that wants to listen. Those are the people that will be there telling their stories. And many of them are very highly qualified professionals. And many of them actually, when they speak on their topics, are used to getting very, very large honoraria for their speeches. They make a lot of money. And all of them come to the Red Pill Expo free. They never get a dime. We pay their expenses to get there. But all of us there, and me and I and all of our staff that makes decisions, and all of our speakers are volunteers because we recognize the importance of getting the word out. So that's what the expo is, and if anybody's interested in participating, I should say there's one other aspect. We want to bring people together face to face. We're beginning to see the calamity of AI, for example, and everything being done on the internet. People are being told they need to stay in their homes and work out of their homes and not meet together in groups. Well, one of the reasons for that is because they don't want people to come together in groups, because those groups might decide to do something about the problem. As a group, you have power, whereas you're isolated behind your monitor on your computer, you have very little power. You can do some things by sending emails and looking at websites, but when it comes to taking back control of your community at the local level, like to have influence in your board of supervisors, county board of supervisors, or city hall, the mayor, the sheriff, board of education, where the real political power begins. If you want to build a movement, as we do, from the bottom up, not from the top down. People think, just get somebody in the White House, one man, and that'll take care of everything. No, it won't. You've got to build a base, solid support, based on principles as outlined in the chasm. So they can't just go around and, we got to replace the bad guys with our guys. No, based on that kind of information, we will take back control of our system. And that's the only way we can do it. So the other purpose of the Red Pill Expo is to bring people out of their homes, get them together so they can sit down and break bread together and talk and exchange telephone numbers and visit each other, have dinner together, and put together strategies for becoming influential in their local communities. And we are building right now what we call campuses of Red Pill University, which is the sponsor of Red Pill Expo. It gets kind of complicated, but just keep in mind this is all one movement, but we have different levels for different interests of different types of people. So let's wind this up now. Red Pill Expo is the place you want to go if you want to meet people of like mind, if you want to see some of the most impressive and knowledgeable teachers on reality. You're going to find them there. And besides, you'll have a good time. We have some fun at those events as well. So yeah, you put up the screen there. If you want to go and see what it's like and see who the speakers are and what their topics are, and hopefully you want to actually come to the event. Yeah, those are our speakers. My eye just fell immediately to this little fellow there with the glasses on in the second row. That's Robert Brame. Fantastic. I mean, he thinks of himself as just a little guy, but he's a giant. He's a forensic I said arsonist, no, a forensic arborist. And so he's a tree expert. And he spent all of his life studying trees and caring for trees and fixing sick trees and so forth. And he discovered on his own, when he saw these California forest fires, just his own curiosity was, he started to visit those scenes of those fires. And what he found is just as shocking as can be. And that is that the trees didn't burn. The forest, here's the anomaly. The trees in a forest fire didn't burn, but all the houses around the trees burned to the ground. How is that? Is this still a forest fire? And he pretty well demonstrated just with his photographic evidence and his analysis that these fires in California were caused by energy weapons, and energy weapons that cause metal to get hotter than wood. And that's why all the metal buildings and the RVs and so forth, and automobiles, many of them were practically melted to the ground. And there are no foliage around them, no trees around them. And the ones that are around them are not burned. And yet the metal is melted and so forth. Well, now he's coming back. This time he's going to report on fires in Canada and in Hawaii and around the world. And he's finding exactly the same thing. So this is the kind of thing, and you'll find all of our speakers have dynamite information of that kind.
Awesome. All right, Ed, thank you so much. Thank you so much again for giving your time up here today. I look forward to speaking to you again. All of the links that Ed said, they're going to be in the bottom. So that's the link to the Chasm. It's a free download. You have to download that. You have to read it. That's an absolute must. There's the link to the Red Pill Expo if you want to go along to that. And I'm going to throw in one more thing that Ed has not mentioned. I mentioned several times throughout this conversation that I've been consuming Ed's work for a very long time. And he's bundled the very, very best of his work up into a product. Is the product called Reality Zone, Ed?
Well, that's our website, yes, Reality Zone.
That's the website. But is there, like, if I want, like there's a bundle of like all this work that I've got. It's got like interview, like a story of Davy Crockett. There's what's that product called?
Well, those are the audio tapes, the audio DVDs, or CDs, I should say. And we call it the audio archives.
The audio archives, that's the word I was looking for. Yes. So if you like listening to stuff as I do, I've consumed everything in the audio archives. It's a phenomenal product on the Reality Zone. Ed sells it for way too cheap. And it's just phenomenal information. So you just download this whole library, listen to it on your iPhone on the way to work or whatever. And it's the most intellectually nourishing thing that you could possibly do. Just brilliant work. It's a lot of fun and really, really cheap. So highly recommend you buy that product too. I'm going to put a link to that in the description.
Well,
all right, Ed, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to share?
I appreciate that because, you know, the audio archives, most of those recordings, 99% of them come from my personal collection. I recorded those things myself when I was a young guy. Anybody show up in town, have a message, I'm there with my tape recorders, right? And so these things come mostly from my collection. And I'm glad you mentioned it because I need to get back there and start releasing some more of them. I I'm going to say that right now, the world's largest collection of audio recordings on these themes. And I say that without much doubt because I did hundreds and hundreds of them when I was young. And the only guy that had more than I was in San Francisco, who was an engineer for IBM. And he had the same high quality recording gear that I did. And he recorded more than I. He would have been at the task longer. Well, when he died, I inherited all of his tapes.
Aha,
So
very
now
interesting.
I think it's pretty safe to say I have thousands of those things. And many of them of his tapes, I have to listen to. I don't have the time for that. I need some kind of a volunteer crew to come in and look at those things.
Send them over. I volunteer. I love that stuff.
Do you? Well,
Yeah,
it's a lifetime project, literally.
yeah. Main place. I will listen to them. That is exactly the kind of thing I will listen to. So if you want to send those over and you want me to give a little report on each one or something, I'm happy to do it.
Well, that's interesting. We need somebody to do that. I'm looking forward to doing it myself, but I don't think it's going to happen. So,
You should focus on the book. I'll listen to the audio. That's a big.
okay. All right. All
All
right.
right.
Thanks again. Thanks again, Max.
Thank you, Ed. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.